Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to a rather croaky Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, our LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
It's lovely to have you back, Dennis. Lara did the podcast last week, but it's always great to have you with me. Now, in a week where plans have been agreed upon to create two unitary councils covering the north and south of Derbyshire, plans to merge Lincolnshire's 10 councils into two unitary authorities have been published, and Somerset, a unitary which was formed 2 years ago now, faces a reported £190 million budget gap over the next 4 years. Dennis, I leave reorganisation and devolution and move to other sector news. What have you got to start us off with?
Well, I'd like to start with elections. The Association of Electoral Administrators has published an important report entitled A New Blueprint for a Modern Electoral Landscape, and the report draws on the frontline experience of over 2,000 members to suggest how elections could be run more effectively for candidates, electors, and of course, administrators. Launching the report, the AEA Chief Executive, Peter Stanion, said, "Constant electoral change without fundamental reform has made elections harder than ever to deliver to the standard voters rightly expect." The first blueprint report was published in 2021, and what was true then is certainly true now, according to the AEA. Rather than supporting the electoral process, they say, an ever-increasing collection of acts and secondary legislation too often works against its effective delivery. Elections are often delivered in spite of, rather than because of, the fragmented and outdated legislative framework. Since 2021, the electoral sector has grappled with the Elections Act 2022 and other legislative change, and more is coming.
Well, that's right, Dennis, because there's votes from the age of 16 is now being considered, and an emphasis on voter registration in the new UK government's manifesto, not so new now though. Informed consolidation and rational reform of electoral law and practice is needed more than ever. And if you add plans for local government reorganisation and increased devolution in England, and the landscape becomes increasingly difficult to navigate. I wasn't meant to mention reorganisation, Dennis, but I can't seem to help it or stay away from it. I didn't get very far, did I?
Indeed, and once again, the AEA have reviewed each stage of the current electoral process, and many of the 57 recommendations require legislative action from the UK and also devolved governments, which they hope will be approached in a consolidated rather than piecemeal manner. Alongside technical recommendations to improve how elections run, the Association are calling for an independent Royal or Parliamentary Commission review of core election delivery processes. They want a review of all existing electoral law to produce a single Electoral Administration Act, which respects devolved nation differences. And also they want UK and devolved governments to work collaboratively on electoral matters in order to limit divergence. And they would also like to see an urgent review of electoral funding and funding mechanisms. Finally, they want the UK government to review supplier capacity to identify and mitigate against potential risk. Now, this report is a must-read for all election officers and their staff. Helen.
Well, we're a big fan of the AEA at LLG, Dennis, and the work they do. So I would urge all our members to take the time to read their report. Now, I'd like to turn to the government's guide to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which was published on the 11th of March. Now, there's big changes ahead, Dennis, in planning, as you know, and authorities are going to have to move quickly to get to grips with all of these. So the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is central to the government's plan to get Britain building again and deliver economic growth. That's their slogan. The bill will speed up and streamline the delivery of new homes and critical infrastructure, supporting delivery of the government's plan for change milestones of building 1.5 million safe and decent homes, they say, in England, and fast-tracking 150 planning decisions on major economic infrastructure projects by the end of their term. And it will also support delivery of the government's Clean Power 2030 target. Do you remember climate change? No one seems to talk about it much anymore. By ensuring that key clean energy projects are built as quickly as possible.
And Helen, there are 5 parts to this guidance, and the list is: Part 1 covers infrastructure, Part 2 planning, Part 3 development and nature recovery, Part 4 development corporations, and finally Part 5 covers compulsory purchase. So Helen, let's take a look at Part 3, development and nature recovery.
Okay, Dennis. Well, the bill establishes the Nature Restoration Fund, which is an alternative approach for developers to meet certain environmental obligations relating to protected sites and species. It allows Natural England or some sort of another designated delivery body to bring forward environmental delivery plans, EDPs. Now, that will set out the strategic action to be taken to address the impact that development has on a protected site or species, and crucially, how these actions will go further than the current approach and support nature recovery. So where an EDP is in place and a developer utilises it, the developer would no longer be required to undertake their own assessments or deliver project-specific interventions for issues addressed by the EDP.
Well, the government believes that this bill will facilitate a more strategic approach to the discharge of environmental obligations and result in improved environmental outcomes being delivered more efficiently. And by reducing delays to development, this innovative approach may also facilitate faster delivery of housing across England. But critics have argued that these proposals are a step backwards for environmental protections.
Well, they have, but the government counters this by saying that when the bill was introduced, the minister confirmed via a statement under section 20 subsection 3 of the Environment Act that this bill would not have the effect of reducing the level of environmental protection of existing environmental law. And the government also states it is clear in its desire to deliver a win-win for nature and for the economy, and are committed to exploring how taking a more strategic approach can secure improved outcomes for the environment. Time will tell, I suppose, on that. Now, in other news, there's an interesting trend emerging on judicial review applications, Dennis.
Well, indeed. The number of judicial review claims brought by local authorities has risen steadily since 2021, but permissions have fallen, according to a report from law firm Burgess Salmon. The research report, entitled Navigating Public Sector High Court Litigation in England and Wales, noted that more than 800 claims were lodged by councils in 2024, but just 104 of these were granted permission to be heard. Now, the report, published by Burgess Salmon in collaboration with litigation intelligence platform Solomonic, looks at public sector high court cases overall and includes data on central government, police forces and local authorities. Apologies here, there are a lot of figures in the next part of this piece. Now, the report is based on data from more than 7,600 high court cases dating back to 2014 and involving more than 1,000 public sector parties based in England and Wales. The report noted that high court litigation involving public bodies accounted for 12% of high court litigation cases over the last decade, and in 80% of those cases the public sector organisation is the defendant. The report said that in cases where the claimant is a public sector body, then the majority of the time, that's 63% of the cases, the claimant is a local authority.
According to the report, public sector high court litigation has steadily fallen since 2014. Now, this is due to a significant decrease in claims against central government. However, the research revealed an increase in claims brought by the public sector, and this was largely driven by a rise in applications by local authorities in the last 4 years. It revealed that 611 applications were lodged by local authorities in 2021. This rose slightly to 628 in 22, and then 742 in 23, and finally 844 applications in 2024.
However, the number of local authority cases that received permission to be heard fell in the same period, from 229 cases in 2021, then 248 in 2022, down to 191 in 2023, and finally just 104 cases in 2024. Now, the report said it was unclear why there's been a drop in the number of cases receiving permission. The report, meanwhile, noted that local authorities were involved in 34% of all public sector High Court litigation cases over the last decade, more than any other public sector body. Central government came second, appearing in 30% of all public sector High Court litigation cases. According to the report, more than 2/3 of all public sector High Court litigation ends in a settlement, while around a quarter result in a formal judgment. 2% of cases are withdrawn. All interesting stuff. Now, there's much more in this report which will be of much interest to our members. Helen.
It is interesting, Dennis, and I wonder whether the impact of some of the changes in relation to judicial review that were brought in previously have impacted at the permission stage, but definitely a good report to spend some time looking at. Now, I want to turn to the hugely important Protection of Children, Digital Safety and Data Protection Bill, which has recently had its second reading. So let's take a look at what the bill will actually do. So now they talk about it in terms of clauses. Clause 1 would require, within 12 months of the passing of the Act, the Chief Medical Officers of the United Kingdom to prepare and publish advice for parents and carers on the use of smartphones and social media use by children. Now, in preparing the advice, the UK Chief Medical Officers would need to have regard to the paper published on the 7th of February 2019, entitled United Kingdom Chief Medical Officers Commentary on Screen-Based Activities and Children and Young People's Mental Health and Psychosocial Wellbeing, a Systematic Map of Reviews, and any scientific or other developments since the publication of that paper, because of course it's 5 years old now, we know the way technology advances, which appear to them to be relevant.
Under Clause 2, within 12 months of the passing of the Act, the Secretary of State would have to publish a plan for research into the impact of the use of social media on children. And under Clause 3, the Secretary of State will have to publish an assessment of, first, the extent to which the online experiences of children are age appropriate, and second, the appropriateness and effectiveness of the digital age of consent. Now, the assessment would have to contain a statement by the Secretary of State on whether the digital age of consent should be increased.
Well, for the purposes of the Act, the digital age of consent would actually mean the age specified in Article 8 of the UK General Data Protection Regulations, at which a child may give consent to the processing of their personal data in relation to information society services. I've never quite heard that term before. So the age at the moment is currently 13. Now, the bill would extend to England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, so it affects all parts of the UK. And it's worth noting here that the Online Safety Act, of course, 2023, is being introduced in phases, and all of those sections are expected to be enforced by 2026. Some are actually coming in this month, Dennis. So now then, last week when Lara joined me on the podcast, we did touch on the National Audit Office's report, which you're going to tell us a bit more about now, but it was more from the point of view of what the Minister Jim McMahon had to say when he was in a committee meeting. So it's definitely worth us taking a closer look at this report, Dennis.
Yes, indeed. The National Audit Office has recommended a whole system, cross-government approach to ensure local authorities' financial sustainability amid planned local government funding and service reforms and the upcoming spending review. Now, in its report, the spending watchdog said local government finances are becoming unsustainable due to increasing demand on essential frontline services, the impact of delayed finance reform, and the erosion of investment in preventative programs. Now, its analysis found that while real terms funding has grown by 4% between 2015 and 16 and 2023 to 24, it has not kept pace with the population growth or the demand for services, the complexity of need, or the cost of delivering services to people most in need of support. Some services are showing the strain, and more local authorities are requesting financial support, some due to the increasing costs of delivering essential frontline services such as homelessness and social care. Now, despite short-term measures to address acute funding shortfalls, including exceptional financial support and several cash injections, the report says that there's been insufficient action to address the systemic weaknesses in local government financial sustainability. And it added, as the government turns its attention to local government reforms, it is essential that this is part of a whole system cross-government approach to ensure local authorities are financially sustainable and can continue to provide essential services. And the report goes on, this approach needs to ensure effective local accountability for the service and financial performance of each local authority, including robust independent assurance. In addition, the National Audit Office noted that most local authorities with responsibilities for pupils and young people with special educational needs and disabilities have overspent their Department for Education dedicated schools grant budget. The NAO issued several recommendations to help the ministry's funding and service reforms, including that government should take the lead in building a cross-government approach to local government financial sustainability. Second, government should develop a funding and service reform plan as part of the spending review that addresses the financial and demand pressures on local authorities, focusing on long-term value for money and clear cross-departmental priorities. And finally, alongside the Treasury, government should explore how the impact of preventative services can be evaluated and incentivized to deliver better outcomes and improve value for money. Helen.
Thank you, Dennis. Very comprehensive. Now, finally, from me, I want to look at a High Court's ruling, which is really quite interesting. So a High Court judge has rejected an application brought by a 14-year-old boy to make himself a ward of the High Court and for an order that he be returned to the jurisdiction of England and Wales from the Republic of Ghana, where he has been living as a boarding school pupil and also with extended family. Now, the Honourable Mr. Justice Hayden found that the young man's parents' exercise of parental responsibility to be lawful and recognised that they felt they had no choice other than to send him to Ghana, and that the greater risk of harm would be for him to remain in the United Kingdom. So this is the case of S and F Ananor 2025.
An interesting case, factually, Helen. This was a family of two daughters and one son. Now, whilst the two girls flourished in the British educational system, the parents had become increasingly worried about their son's disengagement with his education and the young people he had become involved with. It was the parents' case that they were genuinely worried about his safety, so they devised a plan to travel on a family holiday to Ghana to visit a sick relative, and then enrolled him in an international school which appeared to offer an essentially British-based curriculum. Both parents did not conceal the fact that they did not tell their son about this, and the son was outraged when he realised what had happened.
Well, you can kind of understand that in a way, but in the judgment, the Honourable Mr. Justice Hayden concluded that the decision falls within what he regarded as the generous ambit of parental decision-taking, in which the state has no dominion. And he went on that accordingly, though the parents require no encomium from me, I hope it is of some comfort to them that, having heard all the evidence, I share their view of where their son's best interests lie. Now, Mr. Justice Hayden also reminded us in his judgment that parental responsibility was an innovation of the Children's Act 1989. It sent a powerful signal, whilst explicitly acknowledging parental rights, that the focus is on the parents' duties towards their child. Parental responsibility endures until a child reaches the age of 18. The jurisprudence of the Family Court and High Court Family Division emphasises the fundamental principle of family law in this jurisdiction, namely, that responsibility for taking decisions rests with the parents, and that the state should recognise that parents, in most cases, will be better placed to take important decisions concerning their child. Now, the classic statement of the principle is expressed in the judgment of Lord Templeman in Re KD 1988. And I rather like this, Dennis. It says, the best person to bring up a child is the natural parent. It matters not whether the parent is wise or foolish, rich or poor, educated or illiterate, provided the child's moral and physical health are not endangered. Public authorities cannot improve on nature. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on these items and many more discussed today by going to bulletin number 10, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.